Ethan Whitmore, a 43-year-old tech billionaire and single father, was the kind of man whose name echoed through Wall Street boardrooms and Silicon Valley summits alike. He had built his empire from scratch, rising from a cramped one-bedroom apartment to the glittering top floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, but in the shadows of his immense success lived a quiet sorrow that no amount of money could erase: the death of his wife, Grace, 2 years ago from an aggressive form of cancer that had stolen her light within months, leaving behind a void so deep that even the laughter of their 5-year-old son, Oliver, couldn't fill it. Ethan, shattered but determined not to let his grief consume him, threw himself into his work, believing that building a bulletproof legacy for Oliver would be his way of honoring Grace. But as days bled into months and months into years, that legacy started to come at the cost of presence. He missed school plays, dinners, goodnight hugs, always caught up in meetings, press calls, investment rounds, and while his net worth soared, the warmth in his home steadily faded. Oliver, once a bubbly toddler, had grown quieter, clinging to the nanny for comfort instead of his father, and that gnawed at Ethan in ways he rarely admitted, but never acted on, until Maya entered their lives. She was 26, soft-spoken, with kind eyes and a calm that seemed to center even the most chaotic moments. And when she came for the interview wearing a second-hand coat and scuffed shoes, Ethan's assistant had written her off immediately, suggesting more experienced candidates, but Ethan had watched how Oliver crawled into her lap within minutes, how her gentle humming eased the child's anxiety like magic, and in that moment, he'd made a rare impulsive decision. He hired her on the spot. In the weeks that followed, Maya became the steady presence in their household. Never late, never overbearing, always attentive, treating Oliver not just as a job, but as a child to be loved and nurtured, and Ethan, though rarely home, noticed the subtle changes. Oliver smiled more, drew pictures again, laughed spontaneously, and even began asking when his father would come home, a question that both broke and warmed Ethan's heart. Yet still, he remained distant, stuck in the machine of ambition. Until one fateful night changed everything. It was a Thursday, gray skies, relentless meetings, a failed investor pitch, and Ethan returned home past 10 p.m., exhausted and mentally elsewhere. When he walked into the living room and found Oliver asleep on the rug, his small hand wrapped tightly around Maya's, both of them bathed in the soft glow of the fireplace. Something about the scene, a motherless boy clinging to a woman who clearly cared for him deeply, hit Ethan with a wave of guilt and confusion, and that night, after pouring himself a glass of wine, he did something he had never done before. He opened the nanny cam footage, not out of suspicion, but out of a desperate need to understand the bond forming in his absence. The early clips were uneventful: snack times, playtime, story sessions. But then came a moment that shook Ethan to his core. Oliver, sitting alone in his room, clutching a framed photo of Grace, was sobbing uncontrollably, crying out for his mother, and Maya, who had been folding laundry, rushed in, knelt beside him, and instead of offering empty platitudes, began to sing, a soft, haunting lullaby Ethan hadn't heard in years, the very one Grace used to hum to Oliver at night, a song she told Ethan her mother used to sing to her. Ethan's hand trembled, the wine forgotten, as he rewound the footage, watching Maya stroke Oliver's hair and say through her own tears, "It's okay to miss her, sweetheart. She used to sing this to me too." And Oliver, confused but calm, asked, "You knew Mommy?" To which Maya responded, "She was my sister." The words hit Ethan like a freight train, his breath caught in his throat, and he paused the video, heart pounding, mind racing. How could this be? Grace had spoken only briefly, and often painfully, about a half-sister she hadn't seen since childhood, a sibling lost in the foster system after their mother died young, and they were separated, adopted into different homes. Grace had once tried to find her but gave up after years of dead ends, and now here she was, Maya, the quiet, humble woman who had unknowingly stepped into her sister's home, was that very sister's flesh and blood, and Ethan had no idea. He watched more footage. Maya helping Oliver make a scrapbook of memories, telling him about how your mommy used to brush my hair when I was scared, and how she'd sing to me when I had nightmares, and Ethan, once composed and guarded, broke down in uncontrollable sobs, not out of anger or betrayal, but out of shame, shame that he hadn't recognized her, that he'd been too wrapped up in grief and success to see the miracle unfolding in his own home. The next morning, Ethan didn't go to work. Instead, he made breakfast. For the first time in years, awkwardly flipping pancakes while Oliver giggled, and when Maya walked in, surprised to find Ethan still home, he looked up at her with red eyes and a tremble in his voice and simply asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" Maya, startled and visibly nervous, hesitated before saying, "I didn't know how. I wasn't sure if you'd want me here if you knew," and Ethan, voice cracking, replied, "You're the only reason my son smiles again. You're the only piece of grace he has left that still breathes." They sat together for hours, talking, about Grace's childhood, about Maya's journey through the foster system, about the guilt she carried for not finding her sister in time, and about the love they both still held for the woman who had connected them in life and now, in loss. From that day on, the dynamic of their home shifted. Ethan began prioritizing family over fortune, learning to be present for Oliver, not just provide for him. And Maya, no longer just the nanny, became a central pillar of their lives, guiding Oliver not just with warmth, but with stories of his mother that even Ethan hadn't heard. Weekends became sacred, park trips, messy baking sessions, late-night movie marathons, and the penthouse that once echoed with silence now pulsed with laughter, music, and the soft murmur of bedtime stories. One night, as they all sat around the fire building a blanket fort, Oliver looked up and asked innocently, "Daddy, can Auntie Maya live with us forever?" And Ethan, glancing at Maya, who was blinking back tears, replied, "I hope she never leaves." And in that moment, they weren't three broken people sharing space. They were a family, reborn not from tradition, but from love, forgiveness, and second chances. Ethan eventually established a foundation in Grace's name, supporting foster youth reunification programs, and placed Maya in charge of it, not because of obligation, but because she had lived that story, endured its ache, and now carried the torch of healing. And as years passed, what began as a businessman's quiet surveillance became the spark that reignited his humanity, taught him that no amount of wealth could replace the irreplaceable, and reminded him that sometimes, life gives you a miracle in the form of a person you didn't know you were missing, until they're sitting in your living room, holding your child's hand, humming a lullaby that unlocks everything you'd forgotten about love.